On a cold December morning in 1997, the porch light at Claire Henson's farmhouse was still burning. It should have been off hours ago. Inside, her coffee was half poured, the dog barking non-stop, and her car door left open to the wind. By sunrise, the quiet town of Redfield, Iowa, realized something was wrong. Claire had vanished. She wasn't the type to leave without a word. A librarian, a widow, a neighbor everyone trusted. But when officers arrived, they found no struggle, no forced entry, and no trail to follow. Just silence where answers should have been. Within hours, the fields around County Road 211 filled with volunteers, flashlights sweeping through snow and fog. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a sound. People started whispering about a red pickup seen after midnight, about a phone call that no one seemed to have received. And for years, that's all this case was, whispers and cold wind across the Iowa plains. In the next chapter, we'll step into that search, what investigators found, what they missed, and how a quiet town's unanswered questions turned into its longest-running cold case. If you're drawn to real stories where truth hides beneath ordinary lives, stay with us, subscribe, and share your thoughts below, because this one is only beginning. Redfield, Iowa, December 4th, 1997. A small farming town where people left their doors unlocked and waved at every car that passed. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. That morning began like any other, except for one detail that wouldn't make sense until much later. At 6:30 a.m., the porch light at Claire Henson's farmhouse was still on, shining against the frost-covered fields long after sunrise. Her neighbor, Diane Keener, drove by on her way to work and noticed the car door hanging open in the driveway. That was enough to make her stop. Claire wasn't careless. She wasn't forgetful. As Diane later told police, Claire never leaves things undone. She knocked on the door, once, twice. At 6:47 a.m., she called the Dallas County Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher wrote it down as a welfare check. Resident not responding. Dog barking inside. 2 deputies arrived 20 minutes later. They walked through the house, careful not to touch anything. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no broken locks. Everything looked normal. Too normal. One deputy later said, "It felt like she just vanished mid-routine." Outside, her blue 1992 Ford Taurus sat in the gravel drive. The driver's door was open, the passenger seat empty, ignition off. The driver's window was half down, letting in cold air that carried the smell of burnt coffee from inside. The radio was still on, faint static humming, caught between stations. When deputies called in the first report, they classified it as a missing adult, voluntary departure unlikely. By 8 a.m., the small road in front of her house filled with neighbors. Some carried flashlights, others just stood in silence, staring at the farmhouse like it might explain something if they looked long enough. A few people started walking the nearby road, scanning ditches and fence lines. Footprints were found in the frost, leading away from the house for several yards before disappearing into frozen dirt. They didn't match any of the deputies' boots. That was the first real clue, and even that led nowhere. The sheriff called in a K-9 unit from Adel County, about an hour away. In the meantime, neighbors organized an informal grid search. By mid-morning, the sound of barking dogs, crunching snow, and static-filled radios replaced the usual quiet hum of tractors. Redfield was the kind of town that ran on routine. Church on Sundays, the diner at noon, coffee after the library closed. Everyone noticed when someone broke that rhythm, and Claire's absence broke it completely. By lunchtime, her disappearance was all anyone talked about. The town's only gas station clerk remembered seeing her the day before, smiling, carrying groceries. "She looked fine," he said. "Normal." Early theories spread fast. Maybe she'd gone for help and gotten lost in the fields. Maybe someone stopped by late at night. By 10 a.m., Claire's brother Michael was on the road from Des Moines. He told officers over the phone that she'd never leave without calling. "She doesn't even miss Sunday dinner," he said. Deputies searched nearby barns and sheds, then fanned out toward the open fields. The frost had begun to thaw, erasing what little they could see of the footprints. Inside the house, investigators logged small details. The clock on the kitchen wall frozen at 10:59 p.m., possibly from a power blink. The half-eaten piece of toast next to the sink. The faint outline of a tire impression at the edge of the gravel drive, when wider than Claire's car, pointing toward the main road. They photographed it, but the print was too shallow to compare. By noon, the first canine team arrived. The dogs sniffed around the porch, circled the car, and led handlers toward the back pasture. The trail stopped at a barbed wire fence, then vanished. "No scent beyond this point," the handler said quietly. As hours passed, more neighbors gathered. Some brought sandwiches, others prayed. The pastor from First Baptist arrived to comfort the family. Everyone had a theory. No one had an answer. Redfield had 1,400 residents, one traffic light, and now, one mystery. Reporters from the Des Moines Register arrived by sunset, taking photos of deputies pacing through the frost. A single quote from one of them made the evening broadcast. "People here don't just disappear." At 3 p.m., deputies decided to seal the house and mark it as an active investigation. They ran yellow tape around the porch, across the driveway, and through the gate to the backyard. The dog was removed by animal control, leaving the property in complete silence. Diane stayed until they asked her to go home. She said later that what stuck with her wasn't the missing person. It was the sound of the house itself. It felt like it was waiting for her to come back, she said. By sunset, frost returned to the ground. The last deputy on scene looked up at the farmhouse before locking the gate. The porch light, still burning from the night before, flickered once, then went dark. That light would become a symbol in Redfield. The moment an ordinary morning became a mystery that haunted the town for 25 years. Next, we follow the search that began that day. The fields, the rivers, the frozen ground, and how every trace of Claire Henson seemed to vanish before anyone could understand why. By 9 o'clock that morning, the quiet road outside Claire Henson's farmhouse was lined with trucks, county patrol cars, and volunteers bundled against the cold. The Dallas County Sheriff's Office had officially declared a full search. Farmers, firefighters, retired teachers, and off-duty deputies signed up within hours. It was the kind of town where people didn't wait to be asked. They just showed up. There were no drones in 1997, no GPS mapping, no real coordination software. Everything was done with markers and grid maps taped to the hood of a squad car. Helicopters were called in from Des Moines, circling low over the frost-covered fields. The search radius stretched to 15 square miles, open farmland, wooded ravines, and drainage ditches that cut across the Raccoon River Valley. The sheriff told reporters, "We're looking for signs of distress, not a crime scene." At that point, everyone still hoped to find her alive. The weather didn't make it easy. The temperature hovered around 27 degrees. The early frost was melting into mud, swallowing footprints before they could be photographed. Wind rolled through the fields, pushing drifts of powdery snow across tire tracks. By noon, flurries began to fall, blurring the outlines of everything they were trying to preserve. The Raccoon River was half frozen, half running, unpredictable. Ice thin enough to break, current strong enough to carry. One deputy later said, "It was too quiet out there. You could hear your own boots from half a mile away." The K-9 teams arrived just after 10 and began from the porch. The dogs picked up Claire's scent quickly, down County Road 211, along a narrow gravel stretch that curved toward the river bend. For 200 yards, the trail was strong. Then, near the bridge, it stopped cold. The dogs circled, barked, whined, then sat. Handlers described it as a hard stop, meaning the scent didn't fade naturally. It ended suddenly, like the trail had been broken. Deputies looked down the slope toward the water. No drag marks, no footprints leading down. No sign she'd fallen or walked there. Theories started forming before noon. Some said she might have gone for help and slipped into the water. Others believed someone picked her up on the road. One deputy quietly noted that the gravel had 2 overlapping tire patterns. One matched her car, the other didn't. Still, with no physical evidence, the detail was logged and left unresolved. That afternoon, a truck driver called the tip line. He claimed to have seen a woman walking along the roadside around 11 the previous night. The description was vague. Light coat, medium height, moving slowly. It sounded possible, until investigators learned the driver was 15 miles west near Van Meter. Wrong direction, wrong time. The lead went nowhere. Meanwhile, 2 residents living a half-mile from Claire's home told police they'd noticed a red pickup parked near the corn rows just after midnight. One said the headlights were on, cutting across the field. Another thought they heard a door slam. Neither could give a plate number. The sheriff logged the report but reminded the press that red pickups were as common as mailboxes in rural Iowa. Still, the rumor spread fast. By evening, half the town was scanning roads for red trucks. Within 48 hours, more than a dozen locals had called to say they'd seen one somewhere near Redfield. Every tip was checked. None matched. The sheriff's department requested assistance from the Perry dive team. They began working the Raccoon River the next morning, focusing on the area where the scent trail had ended. The ice had to be broken manually with axes. Divers rotated in 20-minute shifts. The water so cold it froze their masks between dives. They searched for 2 full days. No clothing, no body, no sign of struggle beneath the surface. Local papers ran the headline, "No answers beneath the ice." After that, the sheriff quietly suspended water operations, waiting for something more tangible. By the 3rd day, Claire's brother Michael arrived from Des Moines. He brought with him a list, her friends, her routines, the last people she'd spoken to. He told deputies their last phone call was around 8 o'clock the night before she disappeared. They talked about groceries, weekend plans, and her dog's new collar. There was nothing strange about it, he said. She was fine. She was careful. She wasn't the kind to just walk off. He urged investigators to treat it as foul play, but there was nothing to prove that yet. The sheriff's office released a statement on local radio asking for any CB or dashcam sightings from truckers passing through County Road 211. Hundreds of flyers were printed at the Redfield post office, Claire's smiling photo next to the words "missing." Last seen December 3, 1997. Within days, her face was taped to gas station doors, grocery stores, and church boards all over Dallas and Guthrie County. By the weekend, more than 100 volunteers joined the effort. They combed through ditches, barns, and abandoned sheds. Farmers searched their silos. Hunters checked tree stands. Church members set up a lunch station near the command post, serving soup to searchers. Candlelight vigils were held at the town square, led by the same neighbor who'd first found her door open. Reporters from Des Moines and Omaha arrived, filming the quiet chaos of a town trying to make sense of the impossible. Theories began to shift with every new rumor. Some swore they'd heard a car engine late that night. Others insisted she'd planned to move. Tire impressions behind her house were studied and dismissed, one belonging to a volunteer's truck, another too faint to read. Someone mentioned strange noises near the old Marsh trucking property, but by the time deputies checked, snow had already covered the ground. Every possible lead dissolved into the same answer: nothing. By the 9th day, search teams had walked more than 15 miles in every direction. The helicopters returned to Des Moines, their fuel and funding exhausted. Volunteers began going back to work, back to life, leaving behind a handful of deputies and a brother who refused to quit. The sheriff addressed the press again. "We've covered every square foot we can. For now, it's a waiting game." It was the kind of statement small towns cling to, measured, calm, but hollow. That night, Michael drove back to the farmhouse. The lights were still out, the police tape flapping in the cold wind. He walked up the steps, unlocked the door, and turned on the same porch light that had started it all. He didn't say anything to reporters. He didn't have to. It was a quiet message to whoever was listening, that the search wasn't over, and the story wasn't finished. In Redfield, the days that followed grew colder, quieter. Snow fell again, burying tire impressions and footprints, wiping the ground clean. Conversations shifted from where she might be to what might have happened. Some thought she left willingly. Others whispered about the red pickup, about the bridge, about secrets small towns don't talk about out loud. By Christmas, the official investigation had slowed to a crawl. The sheriff's log for December 20th carried one final line under the case name Henson Claire. No further evidence at this time. The town of Redfield would go back to its routines, church bells, winter markets, and quiet dinners. But something had shifted. A silence had settled over the fields, heavy and unspoken. The search had come up empty, and for the first time the community realized this wasn't just a disappearance. It was the beginning of something none of them could explain. In the next chapter, we step away from the search and into the life Claire left behind. The quiet routines, the small-town friendships, and the woman who claimed to be her closest friend. When the search for Claire Henson slowed and the fields of Redfield turned quiet again, investigators began looking backward, into her life, her patterns, and the people who filled her days. Because to understand what happened on that cold December night, you first have to understand who Claire was and who she trusted. Claire Henson was 48 years old, widowed, no children. She'd lived her entire life in Redfield, a small Iowa town where everyone knew each other's license plates and routines. She worked part-time at the community library, 4 days a week, every shift beginning at 9 a.m. sharp. Her co-workers said she was the kind of person you could set your watch by. Same breakfast every morning, same drive into town, same stop at the post office before heading home. Nothing about her life was unpredictable. Her farmhouse sat on County Road 211, surrounded by open farmland and quiet fields that barely changed year to year. She'd kept it running on her own since her husband, Tom Henson, passed away from cancer in 1992. Neighbors remembered how she handled that loss. No public breakdowns, no long absences, just quiet consistency. One friend put it simply, Claire didn't fall apart. She just kept going. She inherited 14 acres of land after Tom's death. Half of it she rented to a local trucking operator, Gary Marsh, who ran Marsh Trucking with his wife, Evelyn. The business was small but steady, and their families had known each other for years. Still, not everyone saw it as friendship. One neighbor later said, Evelyn was always there, maybe too there. At the time, no one thought that meant anything. In small towns, people often blur the line between closeness and control. A few weeks before her disappearance, Claire mentioned to co-workers that she planned to sell part of her land, about 4 acres on the southern lot. She said she wanted to simplify, maybe move closer to town where she wouldn't have to drive in bad weather. It seemed harmless, even practical. But word spread fast, and it reached Evelyn's husband, Gary, who'd been looking to expand his trucking yard. He had already told friends he wanted that exact section for a storage shed and new equipment space. At a church potluck the week before Claire vanished, something happened that caught people's attention. Several attendees remembered a quiet, tense moment between the two women. One witness said, "It wasn't loud, but you could feel it." Claire looked upset, and Evelyn looked trapped. No one heard what was said, but it was the first public crack in a friendship everyone thought was unshakable. In the final week before she went missing, Claire's normally structured routine began to shift. She canceled a lunch date with 2 library co-workers, saying she had a personal matter to handle. When one of them called later that night, she answered briefly, sounding distracted. She said she had something to straighten out before the weekend, the co-worker recalled. That was the last time I heard her voice. Neighbors saw Evelyn visiting the farmhouse twice that week, once Tuesday afternoon and again late Wednesday evening. At the time, no one thought much of it. The two visited each other constantly. But in hindsight, every visit, every conversation would become a timestamp, evidence investigators would later analyze minute by minute. Within 48 hours of Claire's disappearance, detectives began conducting interviews. Evelyn was one of the first. Officers later described her demeanor as calm, helpful, and oddly polished. She volunteered details about Claire's habits, what time she left for work, who she might have called, what she'd eaten that day. Even information the police hadn't yet. As the investigation continued, Evelyn quickly stepped into a different role. Not a suspect, but a spokesperson. She organized prayer circles at the church, printed missing flyers, and spoke to the local press about how much she missed her friend. Cameras captured her wiping tears, pleading for Claire's safe return. She loved Claire, one church member said later. She was heartbroken. You could see it. But not everyone agreed. Some noticed how often Evelyn inserted herself into every meeting, every decision, every interview. She became the first person reporters called for quotes, sometimes before the sheriff's office released information. It was like she needed to be at the center of it, Diane Keener, Claire's neighbor, recalled. Even when there was nothing new to say, she made sure she was the one saying it. In towns like Redfield, that kind of behavior can look like devotion or control. Nobody dared question it at the time. Evelyn was respected, connected, and deeply involved in church finances. To outsiders, she was just a grieving friend trying to hold the community together. As the weeks passed, the emotional divide inside Redfield began to show. Some residents believed Claire might have left on her own, tired of the same quiet life, weighed down by memories of her late husband. Evelyn supported that theory. She told neighbors Claire had seemed overwhelmed lately, maybe needing time away. She was talking about change, Evelyn said in one interview. Sometimes people just reach their limit. But Michael Henson, Claire's brother, didn't buy it for a second. She wouldn't walk away from her dog, her job, or her home, he told reporters. That porch light doesn't stay on by accident. Detectives noted the difference in their tone. Evelyn's insistence that the story should end, Michael's refusal to let it. It was subtle at first, but it mattered. One seemed eager to close the chapter. The other wanted it reopened. In their internal notes, investigators recorded a small observation that would later stand out. Evelyn was the only person to reference specific times, as one deputy later wrote in his report. The person most willing to talk is sometimes the one we should listen to least. By the time the snow melted and the search faded from the front page, Redfield had already moved on, at least on the surface. But the cracks were there, waiting. And soon one phone call would turn those cracks into the first real break in the story Evelyn Marsh had worked so hard to control. For weeks, investigators had nothing. No witnesses, no movement on bank accounts, no trace of Claire Henson anywhere. The searches were over, the leads exhausted. Then, in a stack of routine phone logs, a single call changed everything. A 7-minute window that pulled the entire case back into motion. On December 3, 1997, at exactly 10:58 p.m., Claire's home phone made an outgoing call. The number it dialed belonged to Evelyn Marsh, her best friend and next-door neighbor. The call lasted 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Evelyn had told detectives she hadn't spoken to Claire that night, that their last conversation had been earlier that week. But this record said otherwise. For the first time since the disappearance, something didn't line up. When officers brought her back in for questioning, Evelyn kept her composure. She said, "If she called, I must have been asleep. I never heard the phone ring." The tone was steady, polite, even helpful, the same calm that had made her the perfect community spokesperson in the days after Claire vanished. But when police asked to collect her prosecuting machine, they found something strange. The cassette tape inside, the kind that recorded missed messages, had been erased. Not rewound, not blank. Wiped completely. "Old machines don't erase themselves," the sheriff noted later. Even if she hadn't taken the call, someone had gone to deliberate effort to make sure no message remained. Detectives turned to the local phone company, which in 1997 still stored analog switch backups for a few days at a time. It was a long shot, but worth trying. After hours of recovery work, technicians managed to pull fragments of sound, less than 10 seconds of a call that ended abruptly in static. The voice was faint, strained, but recognizable as Claire's. "Evelyn," she said, "I can't keep this quiet anymore." The line cut out. No further words, no context, just a broken sentence suspended in static. For investigators, it was the first undeniable sign that the night of December 3rd hadn't been routine. Whatever Claire meant to say, she never got the chance to finish. The working theory shifted from disappearance to confrontation, and possibly cover-up. The team reconstructed the timeline minute by minute. The call began at 10:58 p.m. and lasted until approximately 11:06. According to the phone company's service report, Claire's line went dead at 11:07 due to what they called a temporary power interruption. 3 minutes later, at 11:10, a truck driver passing through County Route 7 reported seeing a red pickup pulled over on the shoulder. He described it as mid-90s, maybe a Ford, with headlights on. The driver didn't stop. He assumed it was a breakdown. It was 26 degrees that night, the wind biting and still. The trucker's statement was logged, but dismissed at first. Too many red pickups in Iowa, too little to go on. But in hindsight, it was one of the few moments that overlapped perfectly with the final minutes of Claire's call. Investigators compared notes from the original search. Multiple residents had mentioned a red Ford F-150 parked near Claire's property around midnight. Same description, same color. The registered owners of similar vehicles in the county totaled 3. One of them was Gary Marsh, Evelyn's husband. When questioned, Gary said his truck never left the driveway that night. Officers checked. Snow had fallen, melted, and refrozen in patches, making the ground useless for clean tire impressions. Still, the faint alignment marks in Claire's gravel driveway roughly matched the width of an F-150. No prints, no conclusive proof, but another point on a growing list of coincidences that kept circling back to the same house. Evelyn's alibi came under renewed scrutiny. She repeated what she'd said in her first interview, that she and Gary watched television together until about 10:30, then went to bed. When detectives asked what program they'd watched, Evelyn hesitated. "Something on Channel 8, she said. "The local news, maybe." Channel 8 confirmed later there had been a transmitter outage that night. No broadcast aired between 10:30 and 11. It was a small discrepancy, easy to explain away as memory lapse, but the timing was too close to ignore. Detectives noted that Evelyn's confidence during questioning seemed to waver only when times were mentioned. Her hands stayed still, her tone soft, but her details changed each time she retold the story. "We talked earlier that week" became "maybe that morning." "I went to bed after the news" became "I think I fell asleep before Gary did." None of it directly incriminated her. Yet every word made her timeline less believable. While reviewing Claire's belongings, investigators found one more clue that strengthened the timeline. It was a pager-style emergency alert device, a small rectangular transponder her brother had given her after she got stuck on a rural road the previous winter. It worked through limited cell tower coverage, sending a brief signal when activated. The system logged a final transmission at 11:03 p.m., triangulated near County Route 7, the same area where the red pickup had been reported. That signal, combined with the phone data, placed Claire outside her home minutes after the call with Evelyn began, or ended. It was the last digital footprint she ever left. For detectives, the pieces were starting to form a pattern. A call to her closest friend, a voice message she never finished, a vehicle that shouldn't have been there, a tape that shouldn't have been erased, and a story that changed just enough to protect whoever was telling it. The investigation shifted, quietly but decisively. Officially, the case was still listed as missing person, but inside the department, it had a new internal code: possible foul play. Notes from the sheriff's log dated January 1998 read, "Last known communication directly connects victim and Evelyn Marsh. Verify voice. Verify motive." It was the first time Evelyn's name appeared in the suspect column, written in pencil, not ink, but underlined twice. From that point forward, the tone of the case changed. Detectives no longer asked where Claire went. They began asking who she'd gone to meet and why she never made it back. The physical evidence was still thin. The message was incomplete. The phone data alone couldn't prove anything. But the weight of coincidence was growing heavier by the day. Evelyn Marsh, the woman who had wept on television and led vigils at the church, was now quietly being cross-checked in every file, every lead, every map. Investigators compared her earlier statements to the search logs from December 4th. She'd told reporters she learned Claire was missing around sunrise, yet Diane Keener had said she spoke with Evelyn by phone just after 7 a.m., 20 minutes before Diane called police. Evelyn had seemed calm, even reassuring. "Maybe she's at the post office," she'd said. It was a small detail, but it placed her in the loop before authorities were ever contacted. By the end of winter, detectives had rebuilt the last known hours of Claire Henson's life as best they could. A quiet evening at home, a phone call to her closest friend, and a drive, or a meeting, that ended somewhere near the Raccoon River. No one knew what those 7 minutes on the phone contained, but whatever was said was enough for someone to make sure it was never heard again. The half-erased tape, the red pickup, the vanished woman, all pointed to a story that was just beginning to surface. In rural Iowa, people talked about coincidences and bad luck. But the investigators saw something else. Intent. And even without a body, even without proof, they knew that call at 10:58 p.m. wasn't random. It was a warning, one that came too late. The report from that week ended with a single line: reclassify case. Investigate for confrontation, not disappearance. From that moment, Redfield's quiet ghost story turned into a mystery with a name. And the woman who'd been leading the prayers for Claire was now being quietly investigated as the reason she was gone. Days turned into months, and months into years. The investigation stalled, and Redfield moved on. For the sheriff's office, it was another cold file in a steel cabinet. But for Claire Henson's family, silence was never the same as peace. By spring of 1998, the case was officially marked as missing person, no foul play indicated. That line stayed on every document that followed. It meant there'd be no active leads, no new warrants, no budget to keep looking. News crews packed up, reporters stopped calling. The story that had once gripped a small Iowa town dissolved into rumor and memory. But one person never let it fade. Her brother, Michael Henson. He lived 2 hours away in Des Moines, a quiet accountant with little reason to return to Redfield, except for one. Every December 4th, without fail, he drove back to his sister's farmhouse. He paid the property taxes, trimmed the weeds, fixed the gate, and replaced the porch light bulb. Every winter that light stayed on, glowing through snow, fog, and years of unanswered questions. Locals started calling it the light that never went out. By 1999, Redfield had resumed its rhythm. The library reopened under new management. The Marsh Trucking Company expanded operations, and new families filled the empty homes. For most, Claire's disappearance was an echo of the past, a story whispered at diners and high school hallways. Some said she ran away to Chicago. Others thought she fell through the Raccoon River ice. Everyone had an opinion, but no one looked anymore. The last line in the county file read, "Case closed, pending new information." That same year, Evelyn Marsh quietly became the face of remembrance. She stayed in Redfield, still attending church every Sunday, always the first to volunteer at fundraisers. She organized prayer circles, handed out flyers, and hosted an annual evening of reflection in Claire's memory. The local paper quoted her often. "Claire was like a sister to me," she said. "We just pray she's at peace." People believed her. They saw a woman who never stopped caring. Her devotion looked like grief. Her presence looked like loyalty. It was enough to make everyone else stop asking questions. Michael never did. Over the years, he filed multiple requests with the sheriff's office for access to the original investigation records. Most came back incomplete, heavily redacted, or simply marked "records unavailable." Every anniversary, he drove to the station to ask in person. Each time, the answer was the same. "We did everything we could." So he built his own archive, a single 3-ring binder filled with copies of police notes, newspaper clippings, and timelines he drew himself. He kept photos of the farmhouse, maps of Redfield, and one sheet of paper that said only, "If she's gone, show me where." By 2004, the case had turned into background noise, the kind of story people recalled not with sadness, but with a shrug. In 2010, Redfield High students featured the vanishing of Claire Henson in a local history project. Their teacher described it as the mystery that made our town famous. To them, Claire wasn't a person anymore. She was folklore, an unanswered story from before they were born. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to play her role. She organized every anniversary service, donated flowers for the altar, and even co-authored a church pamphlet titled "Faith Through Uncertainty." Her public devotion erased any lingering suspicion. People admired her grace. No one noticed that the woman leading the vigils had also quietly rewritten the town's memory. In 2014, the original sheriff retired, and the case was boxed up and sent to storage. A younger administration came in, focused on active crimes. The Henson disappearance wasn't even mentioned in their first-year reports. Claire's farmhouse sat mostly empty now, rented occasionally to local farmhands who didn't know its history. By then, Michael's health had started to decline, but his resolve hadn't. He told a friend, "If I go before she's found, make sure they don't stop looking." His voice was calm, but there was nothing peaceful in it. He didn't want closure. He wanted truth. 4 more years passed before anything changed. In 2018, the Dallas County Sheriff's Office began digitizing old case records as part of a modernization grant. A clerk named Ryan Cooper opened a box labeled Henson Claire 97 MP 001. Inside, he found a mix of items that shouldn't have been there: unprocessed evidence tags, hair samples, partial clothing fibers, and a VHS tape of an early interview with Evelyn Marsh. Most of it had never been analyzed with modern tools. The case was flagged for review and forwarded to the Iowa Cold Case Task Force, a specialized unit handling unsolved disappearances statewide. Cooper mailed a form letter to the Henson family. It was short and formal, just a paragraph long. This case has been selected for potential re-examination under the State Cold Case Initiative. Michael received the letter in January 2019. He called the number listed at the bottom the same day. The clerk who answered later recalled his tone: steady, polite, but unyielding. He said, "Whatever you find, don't stop at what's on paper." Weeks later, the state reassigned the case to a new lead. Investigator Cara Lopez, a 33-year-old forensic analyst who'd built a reputation reopening old files through digital reconstruction. Her background wasn't emotional. It was technical. She specialized in what data could reveal when human memory failed. Lopez started with the basics: converting old maps, call records, and handwritten notes into digital format. She found missing timestamps, mislabeled evidence, and physical samples that had never been tested for DNA. In her first report, she wrote one simple line: "No case is truly cold. Only people stop looking." For Michael, reading that line felt like something had finally shifted after 22 years of stillness. For the first time since 1997, the Henson file had movement. When news of the re-examination spread through Redfield, the reactions were divided. Some residents felt relief, as if the town might finally find the truth. Others were uneasy. Reopening the case meant reopening wounds, and some of those wounds had names still living there. "She's old now," one church member said about Evelyn. "Why drag her name through this again?" But others whispered what no one had dared say before. Maybe it's time someone finally did. As winter set in, the lights on Claire's farmhouse glowed again, one bulb burning against the frost just as it had for decades. What began as a brother's act of hope was now the symbol of something larger. The quiet persistence of truth waiting beneath time and dust. The official reopening notice was logged on February 12, 2019. Under Lead Investigator, the name K. Lopez was handwritten and circled twice. Below it, one sentence from Michael's letter was added as an annotation to the file. "Every family needs one person who refuses to move on." That's where the next chapter begins, with a case once forgotten, a brother who never stopped asking, and a light that refused to go dark. In 2019, after 25 years in storage, the Henson case file was reopened. Not because of luck, but because of persistence. The Iowa Cold Case Task Force in Des Moines received the box marked 1997 MP001, Redfield jurisdiction. It had gathered dust for decades. Inside were yellowing reports, cassette tapes, and a handful of untested samples that had survived every archive purge. Investigator Cara Lopez, when Lopez cross-referenced witness accounts, the pickup's timeline matched the missing call window almost perfectly. Her report noted, "Temporal alignment now consistent. Potential suspect proximity confirmed." Next, she turned to the original interviews. Most were on deteriorating VHS tapes. One stood out immediately. The first recorded interview with Evelyn Marsh, given less than 36 hours after Claire vanished. Evelyn's tone was calm, rehearsed, almost polished. She volunteered details no one had asked for. How Claire's coffee cup was left half full on the counter, how the front door was unlocked, how the dog had been barking when police arrived. None of those details had been made public yet. Lopez rewound the tape twice, listening again to Evelyn's phrasing. She made a note in the margin. Possible prior access to scene before official arrival. From the evidence box, Lopez found 3 sealed envelopes labeled unprocessed. Inside were small swabs and slides, a fabric fiber from Claire's kitchen floor, a soil sample from her driveway, and chipped paint fragments from an unknown metal object. All had been logged, but never tested. She ordered re-examination at the Iowa State Crime Lab using new DNA contact analysis and spectrographic comparison. While waiting for results, she shifted focus to location data, specifically the Marsh trucking property where Evelyn and her husband had operated their business in the late 1990s. Old county records revealed that behind the main trucking lot stood a grain storage shed, long unused. Building permits showed the structure had been inactive since 2002. The company stopped using that area after Gary Marsh, Evelyn's husband, became ill. Reviewing aerial photos from the Iowa Department of Agriculture archives, Lopez spotted something odd. Visible soil disturbance near the shed that appeared between 1998 and 2000, roughly 3 years after Claire vanished. She requested a ground-penetrating radar survey to examine the site. In early summer 2020, a GPR team arrived in Redfield. They scanned a 30-foot perimeter around the shed. The radar detected an irregular shape buried about 6 feet deep, rectangular, roughly 6 feet long by 2 wide. The report described it as non-geologic disturbance consistent with excavation and refilling. The site was flagged for follow-up excavation. Before digging, 2 canine cadaver units were brought in to confirm the signal. Both dogs alerted at the same point, one circling before sitting firmly in place. The handler's log entry read, "Positive indication of human decomposition scent. Both teams confirmed." With that, Lopez secured a court warrant to classify the location as an active crime scene. On July 3, 2020, excavation began at sunrise. Forensic crews used small trowels, brushes, and sifters to remove soil layer by layer. By mid-morning, they found fragments of deteriorated canvas tarp. Beneath it, bone fragments appeared. The dig slowed as technicians switched to precision tools. Finally, a nearly complete skeleton was uncovered at a depth of about 5.5 feet. The remains were wrapped in an aged tarp secured with rusted wire. Next to the body, investigators recovered 3 personal items: a small brass house key, a silver locket engraved with the initials CH, and a piece of gray sweater fabric consistent with the one Claire had been last seen wearing. Each was sealed, photographed, and logged into evidence custody. The remains were transferred to the Iowa State Medical Examiner's office in Ankeny. Dental records provided the confirmation. The skeleton belonged to Claire Henson, missing since December 1997. The coroner's report described clear signs of foul play. A skull fracture caused by a single heavy blow to the left side of the head, and ligature marks around both wrists. There was no evidence of post-mortem movement, meaning this was the primary burial site. The official cause of death: blunt force trauma, homicide. With that report, the missing person classification was immediately reissued as homicide, open investigation. Lopez wrote in her summary, "This was never disappearance. It was deliberate concealment." News spread quickly. The Des Moines Register ran a short headline: "Remains found near Marsh property may belong to missing Redfield woman." Local TV crews arrived within hours, parking outside the faded warehouse where the shed stood. Redfield, a town long accustomed to quiet, suddenly found itself under a microscope again. Residents were stunned. Some remembered the search from 1997, the nights spent walking frozen fields with flashlights. Others remembered the woman who had led every memorial service since then, Evelyn Marsh. She was still living in the same house, now 75 years old. When reporters knocked on her door for comment, when the call reached Michael Henson, it was quiet, almost clinical. Lopez told him, "We found her." He didn't say much. That night, for the first time since 1997, the porch light at his sister's farmhouse stayed dark. What the river never revealed The ground finally did. 25 years after Claire Henson disappeared, her story shifted from mystery to evidence, from rumor to fact. The file that began as Missing Person 1997-MP-001 now carried a single unambiguous word stamped in red: homicide. What they found beneath the old shed wasn't just remains. It was proof that time couldn't erase. Every fragment of bone, every thread of fabric, every inch of soil became part of a story that was finally ready to speak. The evidence was sealed, logged, and sent to the Iowa State Crime Lab for full forensic processing. For the first time in 25 years, the Henson case was no longer a mystery. It was an investigation with direction. Technicians began the slow, careful work of extraction. DNA testing was ordered on hair strands, trace skin cells, and the deteriorated canvas tarp that had wrapped Claire's remains. Using advanced mitochondrial sequencing, analysts generated two profiles. The first matched Claire Henson. The second didn't. The secondary DNA belonged to another female, unrelated to the victim. When the profile was cross-referenced against the state database, the match came back with statistical certainty. Evelyn Ruth Marsh. The lab report was simple, unemotional. DNA contact transfer consistent with direct handling of victim post-mortem. In other words, Evelyn had touched that tarp. And she'd done it when Claire was already gone. Further testing confirmed small blood traces on one corner of the tarp that matched Claire's DNA. The soil beneath the body contained high iron and phosphate residues unique to the farmland behind the Marsh trucking lot. Paint fragments recovered from Claire's kitchen floor matched the red enamel used. Every piece pointed the same direction. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was converging: biological, physical, and spatial. On July 15, 2021, the Dallas County Sheriff's Office issued an arrest warrant for Evelyn Ruth Marsh, 76, charging her with second-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. Deputies arrived at her home just after 8 a.m. She opened the door before they knocked. When told she was under arrest, she didn't protest, didn't ask why. She looked at the officers and said quietly, "I wondered how long it would take." She was transported to the Dallas County Detention Center and placed in an interview room with investigator Kara Lopez and an assistant district attorney. Evelyn sat calmly, hands folded on the table. Her posture was steady, her breathing controlled. Lopez slid the DNA report across the table, followed by photographs of the excavation and the recovered locket engraved with the initials CH. Evelyn didn't reach for them. When asked if she recognized the locket, she nodded once. That was hers. Lopez wrote in the transcript, "Subject displayed no denial response, only emotional withdrawal." 2 hours into questioning, Evelyn finally spoke. She threatened to ruin everything. "I just wanted her to stop." Her voice was even, without anger or tears. She said that on the night of December 3, 1997, Claire had come to her house unannounced, demanding answers about missing church donations. The church's outreach fund had been short several $1,000s, and Claire had traced the discrepancy to checks deposited into an account under Evelyn's name. She said I'd embarrassed the church, Evelyn told them. She said she was going to the police in the morning. Evelyn paused, then added, "I didn't plan to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop talking." With her statement as a guide, investigators reconstructed the final hours of Claire's life. Claire arrived at the Marsh property between 10:45 and 10:50 p.m. The argument happened near the grain shed. Forensic accountants later verified what Claire had discovered. Over 3 years, Evelyn had siphoned roughly $14,000 from church donations into her personal account. In a small town like Redfield, exposure meant ruin, social, financial, and moral. The church ledger books still carried faint indentation marks from Evelyn's handwriting. The motive wasn't mystery or passion. It was desperation wrapped in pride. A simple theft that turned into a killing, covered by years of charm and control. The news broke before the town was ready. For Redfield, it was more than a crime solved. It was trust destroyed. The woman who had organized every prayer vigil for Claire, who led every remembrance service, who comforted neighbors and lit candles in the church foyer, had been the reason those vigils existed. The Des Moines Register headline read, "Friend turns foe. Arrest in Henson disappearance." Pastor Harold Davis spoke to the press outside the church. "We mistook control for compassion," he said. "She comforted everyone except the one who needed it most." People in town struggled to believe it. One resident said, "She used to stop by every Christmas and tell us not to lose faith." All that time she was talking about herself. During her second interrogation, Evelyn was given a chance to clarify her statement. She didn't hesitate. "It was one mistake that kept becoming another. I couldn't take it back." She signed the confession with a steady hand, then refused to say anything else. When asked if she wished to make a public statement, she declined. Lopez wrote in her closing report, "Subject displayed remorse only for being discovered, not for the act itself." The forensic evidence was airtight. DNA from the tarp, blood from the soil, financial records and Evelyn's own admission all converged into one narrative. The disappearance of Claire Henson had never been a mystery about chance or fate. It was about trust, betrayal, and a single decision that snowballed into silence lasting a quarter-century. When the press conference was held announcing the resolution, by the fall of 2021, the investigation was complete. What began as a disappearance had become a full homicide case, backed by forensic proof, DNA, and a confession. All that remained was justice. Prosecutors in Des Moines filed 2 charges against 76-year-old Evelyn Marsh: second-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. Evelyn entered a plea of not guilty, claiming she had acted in self-defense during an argument that spiraled out of control. The trial was set for the spring of 2022. The courtroom was small, familiar, and tense, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. Redfield residents filled the benches, faces caught somewhere between disbelief and quiet anger. Evelyn walked in wearing a pale blue cardigan, escorted by deputies. She looked fragile, but her posture was straight, eyes forward. In the front row, Michael Henson sat with investigators, holding a faded photograph of his sister, the same one he had carried to every anniversary vigil for 25 years. A reporter who covered the trial later wrote, "People came to see justice, but no one came to celebrate it. The prosecution opened first. Their statement was precise and calm. They laid out the 4 pillars of the case: motive, financial fraud through forged church donations; opportunity, the confrontation on December 3, 1997; means, the blunt force weapon recovered from the Marsh property; and cover-up, the staged disappearance and hidden grave under the shed. The defense tried to counter with a simple story: an elderly woman frightened by a sudden confrontation who struck out in panic. But the prosecutor's reply was quiet and final. She didn't defend herself. She buried the truth. Then came the science. The lead forensic expert walked the jury through the DNA chain of custody: the tarp, the sweater fibers, the small traces of blood. Every sample, she said, was properly preserved and retested under updated protocols. The match to Evelyn Marsh was absolute, with a margin of error less than. When Michael Henson took the witness stand, the courtroom shifted. He didn't raise his voice or look at Evelyn. He spoke quietly. For 25 years, she prayed with me. I thought she missed my sister. She just missed control. A few jurors wiped their eyes. The silence afterward felt heavier than any outburst could have been. The defense tried to hold ground. They repeated the claim that Evelyn had acted in self-defense, panicking when Claire confronted her about the missing funds. But the cross-examination dismantled it piece by piece. No medical record from 1997 showed any injuries on Evelyn consistent with a struggle. The phone records confirmed that Claire's call at 10:58 p.m. lasted nearly 8 minutes, meaning she was calm and unarmed before the fatal blow. The prosecutor ended with one line that hung in the air. This wasn't panic. It was a choice, made in silence, kept for a lifetime. The jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom stood. The foreman read the verdict aloud: guilty of second-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. Evelyn exhaled once but said nothing. She didn't turn toward anyone. Michael bowed his head, holding the photo of his sister as Investigator Lopez closed her notebook. After 25 years, one sentence had ended the longest chapter of his life. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to Evelyn. He called her deception a wound inflicted not only on one family but on an entire community. He described how she had manipulated trust, weaponized sympathy, and hidden the truth behind years of service and prayer. Then he delivered the final order: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Evelyn declined to make a statement. Her only words to her attorney were, "I'm tired." Deputies led her out as the courtroom stayed completely still. News of the verdict spread fast across Iowa. The Des Moines Register headline read, "Justice 25 years late, but finally home." In Redfield, the church held its first official memorial for Claire Henson. Candles lined the steps that night. Pastor Harold Davis told the crowd, "We pray in small towns. Grief doesn't fade. It just finds somewhere to rest." After 25 years, the light that never went out finally had a reason to. Justice, after a quarter century. Quiet, steady, and finally home. For 25 years, the people of Redfield lived with questions. Now they live with answers, and with the quiet weight those answers bring. Justice was done. The truth was confirmed. But after a quarter-century of silence, even justice leaves behind an echo. The town that once whispered about Claire Henson now says her name out loud, not as a mystery, but as a woman who finally came home. Redfield moves slowly, trying to make sense of it all. Some residents still can't reconcile the woman they prayed beside with the one who caused so much pain. Pastor Harold Davis said it simply, "Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just helps us live with what's left." Each winter since the verdict, the Candlelight Memorial has grown. What began as a handful of neighbors now fills the steps of the church. They gather not out of curiosity but respect, to remember a story that defined their small town and changed how they see trust, faith, and truth. For Michael Henson, closure became a calling. The brother who kept his sister's porch light on for 2 decades turned his persistence into something larger. He founded the Claire Henson Foundation, an organization dedicated to families of long-term missing persons. The foundation funds search operations, provides legal guidance, and connects families with investigators across the Midwest. "We couldn't save my sister," Michael told a local reporter, "but we can make sure other families don't wait 25 years for someone to listen." His words became the foundation's mission. Within its first year, the group partnered with the Iowa Cold Case Task Force to train small-town law enforcement on modern evidence preservation. The task force itself cites the Henson case as a milestone, proof that patience, combined with modern science, can close even the oldest files. Investigator Cara Lopez, the forensic analyst who reopened the case, now teaches it to new recruits. At Redfield High School, a new plaque hangs outside the library. It reads, "In honor of Claire Henson, for courage that stayed quiet and truth that refused to fade." The school also awards the Quiet Courage Scholarship every spring to students entering criminal justice or social service programs. As part of the scholarship, students visit the Iowa Cold Case Unit in Des Moines, learning how one community's persistence helped restore another family's peace. Evelyn Marsh, now in her late 70s, remains in custody at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women. Her health has declined, and she has refused every interview since her conviction. A note she passed to a prison chaplain surfaced later, though never officially verified. It read, "I thought I buried a mistake. I buried a person." Her property was eventually sold, and the proceeds quietly donated to a state victims support fund, a final gesture arranged by her attorney. Today, the farmhouse where Claire once lived still stands on County Road 211. Its porch light burns every winter night, maintained by volunteers from the foundation that bears her name. To those who pass by, it's more than a symbol. It's proof that time can't erase truth. It only delays it. Justice didn't bring back what was lost, but it made sure silence wouldn't win. If this story moved you, take a moment to keep Claire's light alive. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Every comment keeps her memory burning a little brighter and reminds us why some stories are worth never giving up on.